I wonder what interesting new facts I'm going to hear, he said, and laughed to himself, and Chip turned away from him. His nervousness and feeling of disturbance fell away as he faced a wall that glittered and skittered with 1,000 sparkling mini lights, and the voice of the elevator spoke in his ear, telling him, while the lights showed him, how UniComp received from its round-the-world relay belt the microwave impulses of all the uncountable scanners and telecomps and telecontrol devices, and how it evaluated the impulses and sent back its answering impulses to the relay belt and the sources of inquiry. And that would be the signals intelligence in this emergent noetic superorganism. Gaia superorganism. Yes, he was excited. Was anything quicker, more clever, more everywhere than Uni? And the next span of wall showed how the memory banks worked. A beam of light flickered across crisscrossed metal squares, making parts of it glow and leaving parts of it dark. And the voice spoke of electron beams and superconductive grids and of charged and uncharged areas becoming yes or no carriers of different bits of information. And when a question was put to UniComp, the voice said, it scanned the relevant bits. He didn't understand it, but that made it so much more wonderful that Uni could know all there was to know so magically and so ununderstandably. And the next span was glass, not wall, and there it was, UniComp, a twin row of different colored metal bulks, like treatment units, only lower and smaller, and some of them pink and some of them brown and some orange, and among them, in the large, rosily lit room, 10 or a dozen members in pale blue overalls, smiling and chatting with one another as they read meters and dials on the 30 or so units and marked what they read on the handsome pale blue plastic clipboards. There was a gold cross and a sickle on the far wall, and a clock that said 11:08, Sunday, 12 April 145, YU. And music crept into Chip's ear and grew louder. Outward, outward, played by an enormous orchestra so movingly, so majestically, that tears of pride and happiness came to his eyes. He could have stayed there for hours, watching those busy, cheerful members and those impressively gleaming memory banks listening to outward, outward, and then one mighty family. But the music thinned away as 11:10 became 11:11, and the voice, gently aware of his feelings, reminded him of other members waiting and asked him to move on, please, to the next display farther down the hallway. And reluctantly he turned himself from UniComp's glass wall with the other members who were wiping at the corners of their eyes and smiling and nodding, and he smiled at them and they at him. And Papa John caught his arm and drew him across the hallway to a scanner-posted door. Well, did you like it, he asked, and Chip nodded. That's not Uni, Papa John said, and Chip looked at him. Papa John pulled the earpiece out of Chip's ear. That's not UniComp, he said in a fierce whisper. Those aren't real. Those pink and orange boxes, those are toys for the family to come look at and feel cozy and warm with. His eyes bulged close to Chip's specks of his spit hit Chip's nose and cheeks. It's down below. There are 3 levels under this one, and that is where it is. Do you want to see it? Do you want to see the real UniComp? And Chip could only stare at him. Do you, Chip? Do you want to see it? I can show it to you. And Chip nodded. Papa John let go of his arm and stood up straight, and he looked around and smiled. All right, let's go this way. And taking Chip's shoulder, he steered him back the way they had come, past the glass wall thronged with members looking in, and the flickering light beam and the memory banks and the skittering wall of mini lights, and said, excuse us, please, through the line of incoming members and down to another part of the hallway that was darker and empty, where a monster telecomp lolled broken away from its wall display, and 2 blue stretchers lay side by side with pillows folded and blankets on them. And there was a door in the corner with a scanner beside it, but as they got near, Papa John pushed down Chip's arm. The scanner, Chip said. No, John said. Isn't this where we're? Yes. And Chip looked at Papa John, and Papa John pushed him past the scanner, pulled open the door, thrust him inside, and came in after him, dragging the door shut against its hissing, slow closer. And again, this is boundary crossing, right? The logging in and the bracelets and the crossing of boundaries. And, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about IBM, they really focus on the Hollerith cards and World War II and the Holocaust, which, you know, is significant for sure. And my understanding is like that the Netherlands had the most people taken away and killed in the Holocaust because they had the best record keeping through the Hollerith cards. But the other thing that doesn't really get talked about so much is the role of IBM in apartheid in South Africa. And again, that is all controlling boundaries and movements. And at the time of the lockdowns, that was really my focus when I was originally in Austin and talking about IBM, was this boundary crossing. But this discussion of the bracelet and the scan and knowing where you are, that's all logging the boundary and access. Okay, back to the story. Chip stared at him, quivering. "It's all right," Papa John said sharply, and then not sharply, kindly, he took Chip's head in both his hands and said, "It's all right, Chip. Nothing will happen to you. I've done it lots of times." "We didn't ask," Chip said, quivering. "It's all right," Papa John said. "Look, who does UniComp belong to?" "Belong to? Who is it? Whose computer?" It's the whole family's." "And you're a member of the family, aren't you?" "Yes." "Well, then it's partly your computer, isn't it? It belongs to you, not the other way around. You don't belong to it." "No, we're supposed to ask for things," Chip said. "Chip, please, trust me," Papa John said. "We're not going to take anything. We're not even going to touch anything. We're only going to look, and that is the reason I came here today, to show you the real UniComp. You want to see it, don't you?" Chip, after a moment, said, "Yes." "Then don't worry. It's all right." And Papa John looked reassuringly into his eyes, and then let go of his head and took his hand. And they were on a landing with stairs going down, and they went down 4 or 5 of them into coolness. And Papa John stopped Chip. "Stay right here. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Don't move." Chip watched anxiously as Papa John went back up to the landing, opened the door to look, and then went quickly out. The door swung back toward closing, and Chip began to quiver again. He had passed a scanner without touching it, and now he was alone on a chilly, silent stairway, and Uni didn't know where he was. And the door opened again, and Papa John came back with blue blankets over his arm. "It's very cold," he said. They walked together, wrapped in blankets, down the just wide enough aisle between 2 steel walls that stretched ahead of them, convergingly to a faraway cross wall, and reared up above their heads to within half a meter of a glowing white ceiling. Not walls, really, but rows of mammoth steel blocks set each against the next and hazed with numbered on their fronts in eye-level black stencil figures. H46, H48 on this side of the aisle, H49, H51 on that. And the aisle was one of 20 or more, narrow parallel crevices between back-to-back rows of steel blocks. The rows broken evenly by the intersecting crevasses of 4 slightly wider cross aisles. They came up the aisle, their breath clouding from their nostrils, the blurs of near shadows staying beneath their feet, the sounds they made, the paplon rustle of their coveralls, the slapping of their sandals were the only sounds there were, edged with echoes. "Well?" Papa John said, looking at Chip. Chip hugged his blanket more tightly around him. "It's not as nice as upstairs," he said. "Nope," Papa John said. "No pretty young members with pens and clipboards down here. No warm lights and friendly pink machines. It is empty down here from one year to the next. Empty and cold and lifeless. Ugly." They stood at the intersection of 2 aisles, crevasses of steel stretching away in one direction and another, in a third direction and a fourth, and Papa John shook his head and scowled. "It's wrong," he said. "I don't know why or how, but it is wrong. Dead plans of dead members, dead ideas, dead decisions." "Why is it so cold?" Chip asked, watching his breath. "Because it's dead?" Papa John said and shook his head. "No, I don't know. They don't work if they're not freezing cold. I don't know. All I knew, I was getting the things where they were supposed to be without smashing them." And they walked side by side along the aisle, R20, R22, R24. How many are there? 1,240 on this level, 1,240 on the level below. And that's only for now. There's twice as much space cut out waiting behind that east wall for when the family gets bigger. Other shafts, another ventilating system already in place. They went down to the next lower level, and it was the same as the one above, except there were steel pillars at 2 of the intersections and red figures on the memory banks instead of black ones. They walked past J65, J63, J61. "The biggest excavation there ever was," Papa John said, "the biggest job there ever was, making one computer to obsolete the old 5. There was news about it every night when I was your age. I figured out that I wouldn't be too late to help. When I was 20, I provided I got the right classification, and so I asked for it." "You asked for it?" "That's what I said." Papa John said, smiling and nodding. It wasn't unheard of in those days. I asked my advisor to ask Uni. Well, it wasn't Uni, it was UniComp. Well, anyway, I asked her to ask, and she did, and Christ marks wood and way, and I got it 042C, construction worker 3rd class, first assignment here. And he looked about, still smiling, eyes vivid. They were going to lower these hulks down the shafts one at a time, he said, and laughed. And I sat up all night and figured out that the job could be done 8 months earlier if we tunneled in from the other side of Mount Love. And he thumbed over his shoulder and rolled them in on wheels. And UniComp hadn't thought of this simple idea. Or maybe it was in no big rush to have its memory siphoned away. He laughed again. He stopped laughing, and Chip, watching him, noticed for the first time his hair was all gray now. The reddish patches that he'd had a few years earlier were completely gone. And here they are, all in their places, rolled down my tunnel and working 8 months longer than they would have been otherwise. He looked at the banks he was passing as if he disliked them. Chip said, "Don't you like UniComp?" And Papa John was silent for a moment. "No, I don't," he said, and cleared his throat. "You can't argue with it. You can't explain things to it." "But it knows everything," Chip said. "What's there to explain or argue about?" They separated to pass a square steel pillar and came together again. "I don't know," Papa John says. "I don't know." And he walked along, his head lowered, frowning, his blanket wrapped around him. "Listen," he said, "is there any classification that you want more than any other? Any assignment that you're especially hoping for?" Chip looked uncertainly at Papa John and shrugged. "No, I want the classification I'll get, the one I'm right for, and the assignments I'll get, the ones that the family needs me to do. There's only one assignment anyway, helping to spread the family through the universe," Papa John said. "I know. Through the unified UniComp universe. Come on, let's go back up. I can't take this brother fighting cold much longer." Embarrassed, Chip said, "Is there another level?" You said, "We can't. There are scanners there and members around who would see us not touching them and rush to help us. And there's nothing special to see down there anyway, the receiving and transmitting equipment and the refrigerating plants." They went to the stairs, and Chip felt let down. Papa John was disappointed with him for some reason, and worse, he wasn't well, wanting to argue with Uni and not touching scanners and using bad language. "You ought to tell your advisor," he said as they started up the stairs, "about wanting to argue with Uni." "I don't want to argue with Uni," Papa John said. "I just want to be able to argue if I want to argue." Chip couldn't follow that at all. "You ought to tell him anyway. Maybe you'll get an extra treatment." "Probably I would," Papa John said, and after a moment, "All right, I'll tell him. Uni knows everything about everything." And then they went up the second flight of stairs, and on the landing, outside the display hallway, stopped and folded the blankets. Papa John finished first, and he watched Chip finish folding his. "Do you know why I gave you the name Chip?" Papa John asked him. "No," Chip said. "Well, you see, there's an old saying, a chip off the old block, and it means that a child is like his parents or his grandparents." "Oh." "I didn't mean you were like your father or even like me," Papa John said. "I meant you were like my grandfather because of your eye." Partial heterochromia. Because of your eye, he had a green eye too. And actually, that's full heterochromia. It's the full eye is a different color. That's full heterochromia. He had a green eye too, and Chip shifted, wanting Papa John to be done talking so they could go outside where they belonged. "I know you don't like to talk about it," Papa John said, "but it's nothing to be ashamed of. Being a little different from everyone else isn't such a terrible thing. Members used to be so different from each other. You can't imagine. Your great-great-grandfather was a very brave and capable man. His name was Hanno Riebeck. Names and numbers were separate then, and he was a cosmonaut who helped build the first Mars colony. So don't be ashamed that you've got his eye. They fight around with the genes today, excuse my language, but maybe they missed a few of yours, and maybe you've got more than a green eye. Maybe you've got some of my grandfather's bravery and ability too." And he started to open the door, but turned to look at Chip again. "Try wanting something, Chip," he said. "Try a day or two before your next treatment. That's when it's easiest to want things and to worry about things." And when they came out of the elevator into the ground level lobby, Chip's parents and Peace were waiting for them. "Where have you been?" Chip's father asked, and Peace, holding a miniature orange memory bank, not really, said, "We've been waiting so long." "We were looking at Uni," Papa John said. And Chip's father said, "All this time?" "That's right. You were supposed to move on and let other members have their turn. You were, Mike, Papa John said smilingly. My earpiece said, John, old friend, it's good to see you. You and your grandson can stay and look as long as you like. And Chip's father turned away, not smiling. They went to the canteen, claimed cakes and cokes except Papa John, who wasn't hungry, and took them out to the picnic area behind the dome. And Papa John pointed out Mount Love to Chip and told him more about the drilling of the tunnel, which Chip's father was surprised to hear about. A tunnel to bring in 36 not-so-big memory banks. Papa John told him that there were more banks on the lower level, but he didn't say how many or how big they were or how cold or how lifeless. And Chip didn't either, and it gave him an odd feeling knowing there was something that he and Papa John knew and weren't telling the others. It made the two of them different from the others and the same as each other, at least a little. And when they had eaten, they walked to the carport and got on the claim line, and Papa John stayed with them until they were near the scanners, and then he left, explaining that he would wait and go home with two friends from Riverbend who were visiting Uni later in the day. Riverbend was his name for 55131, where he lived. And the next time Chip saw Bob N.E., his advisor, he told them about Papa John and that he didn't like Uni and that he wanted to argue with it and explain things to it. And Bob, smiling, said, well, that happens sometimes with members your grandfather's age, Lee. It's nothing to worry about. But can't you tell Uni, Chip said, maybe he can have an extra treatment or a stronger one. Lee, Bob said, leaning forward across the desk, the different chemicals we get in our treatments are very precious and hard to make. And if older members got as much as they sometimes need, they might not be enough for the younger members who are really the most important to the family. And to make enough chemicals to satisfy everyone, we might have to neglect the more important jobs. Uni knows what has to be done and how much of everything there is and how much of everything everyone needs. And your grandfather isn't really unhappy, I promise you. He is just a bit crotchety, and we will be too when we are in our 50s. He uses that word, Chip said, F blank 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 T. Old members sometimes do that too, Bob said. They don't really mean anything by it. Words aren't in themselves dirty. It's the actions the so-called dirty words represent that are offensive. Members like your grandfather use only the words, not the actions, and it is not very nice, but it is no real sickness. How about you? Any friction? Let's leave your grandfather to his own advisor for a while. No friction, Chip said, thinking about having passed a scanner without touching it and having been where Uni hadn't said he could go, and now suddenly not wanting to tell Bob about it. No friction at all. Everything is top speed. Okay, Bob said. Touch. I'll see you next Friday, right? A week or so later, Papa John was transferred to USA 60607, and Chip and his parents and Peace drove to the airport at EUR 55130 to see him off. And in the waiting room, while Chip's parents and Peace watched through a glass the members boarding the plane, Papa John drew Chip aside and stood looking at him, smiling fondly. Chip, Green Eye, he said. And Chip frowned and tried to undo the frown. You asked for an extra treatment for me, didn't you? Yes, Chip said. How did you know? Oh, I guess that's all, Papa John said. Take good care of yourself, Chip, and remember who you're a chip off of. And remember what I said about trying to want something. I will, Chip said. And the last ones are going, Chip's father said, and Papa John kissed them all goodbye and joined the members going out. And Chip went to the glass and watched and saw Papa John walking through the glowing dark toward the plane, an unusually tall member, his take-along kit swinging at the end of a gangling arm. And at the escalator he turned around and waved, and Chip waved back, hoping Papa John could see him, and then turning again and put his kit hand wrist to the scanner. Answering green sparked through the dusk and distance, and he stepped onto the escalator and was taken smoothly upward. And in the car, going back, Chip sat silently, thinking that he would miss Papa John and his Sunday and holiday visits. It was strange, because he was such an odd and different old member, and yet that was exactly why he would miss him. And Chip suddenly realized because he was odd and different, and nobody else would fill his place. What's the matter, Chip? His mother asked. I'm going to miss Papa John, he said. So am I, she said, but we'll see him on the phone once in a while. Remember, this is 1970. It's a good thing he's going, Chip's father said. I want him to not go, Chip said. I want him to be transferred back here. He's not very likely to be, his father said, and it's a good thing. He's a bad influence on you. Mike, Chip mother said. Don't you start that cloth, Chip's father said. My name is Jesus, and his is Lee. And mine is Peace, he said. So that is chapter 2 of This Perfect Day by Ira Levin, also author of Rosemary's Baby, the movie of which came out the year I was born. And my mother's name is Rosemary, so that's always an interesting sync. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this read aloud, and as an odd oldster who is in her 50s, I can appreciate that. Again, I don't know that that's necessarily to make everybody the same, but I do feel like that this protocol layer is something that is not alive and vital and connected to nature. And so we ought to be mindful of walking forward into UniComp, whether that be IBM or some other technology company. And I do want people to pay attention to that the things that are put before you in the news are often the Hegelian dialectic and to move us in a certain direction, in a certain way. So the Barbie Robinson IBM contract and the Marianne Dewan Santa Clara County Head Start finance accounting errors, just know that there's more going on than they're telling you. There's only a partial story being told. And yeah, what works? Evidence-based government on blockchain. It seems to me every indication that that is the plan, and they're going to come up with narratives to run in that direction. All right, bye. And so I'm just going to finish off with this, just showing you the Harris County Public Health Community Health Program and access. This is what the contract was for, I guess the data software backend that IBM was providing. And so you can see, I'll just read the homepage here from the About Access Harris County, accessing coordinated care and empowering self-sufficiency. Access. Harris County is an integrated care coordination model that works to improve outcomes for vulnerable individuals through a care coordination team. This team focuses on supporting clients holistically by addressing multiple needs to achieve well-being and self-sufficiency. Access Harris County works with community members experiencing hardships, including health challenges, physical and or mental, financial, housing needs, substance abuse, and social inequity by providing intensive wraparound support across Harris County's safety net system. And so again, remember what I said about Elizabeth Hinton's book about the social safety net and the policing, and this is going to look like sort of soft glove policing. And and just consider what the read aloud with UniComp and the family, and that really some people's operating system is meant to work quietly within the system and have everything assigned and decided for the family, right, for the common good, for the commons, and then other people want to be able to ask questions and have their own agency in the system. And so again, I understand that there are significant social issues at work in our world, but if we are going to address them, I would not choose to have global hedge funds, which aren't just about making money, but are about creating the signals intelligence of the kind that UniComp represents in the system. I wouldn't have global hedge funds running it. I wouldn't have DARPA running it. I wouldn't have Chan Zuckerberg's Benefits Data Trust running it. I would not have it running on a UniComp level, because no, computers actually don't know what people need. And my one challenge within UniComp is I don't think that the goal is really to flatten everybody out as much as that chapter described, but I think it's to bring people into a story through these holons, through these intentional communities where they're in their own sort of reality echo chamber, and that they feel like they have agency within that story. And so in The Perfect Day, the Chip eventually grows up, and then he sort of acts out, and then he tries to escape the UniComp world by going to this island. But then the island is just its own other level of the dream, because it's all still part of the same structure. It's just they're being managed, and they feel like they have more agency, but it's not really outside the system. It's just a sub-component of the system. And so it is important to understand. I know it's boring. Public policy is boring. I mean, it's also very volatile and polarizing because of the culture wars that have gone on, and there's not an easy fix to this without addressing, how people are going to be able to have their own economic resources in an age of AI, possibly taking over or upending what we currently understand as work. So both from the liberal progressive anarchist side on one side to the conservative libertarian side on the other side, like we don't really have easy solutions in terms of, and we won't until we actually understand the blockchain and understand the protocol layer and have a context for understanding this, maybe as an interdimensional information space situation that involves our spirit and our psyche, that some of it is like non-material, and in controlling the material aspects of food and healthcare and support and shelter, they are going to have access to our soul and our psyche, and it's they're going to have lovely clip art that makes it all look very wonderful. But in my opinion, it's the thing running this is a lifeless thing, and it does look like Papa John's description of the underground version, the non-public version of the UniComp. So we do have to get up to speed. I mean, I guess we don't have to. I mean, all I can do is control my little corner of my consciousness. But on behalf of all people in vulnerable communities, and that's a lot of people, and even if you're somebody who has financial security, this is also focusing on the elderly, right? Surely you have beloved elderly people in your life, or it's going to be pulling in people with who are neurodivergent or autistic, and clearly that's another huge area. Like, just having money isn't going to fix this. There's aspects of these public policy situations that are going to touch each and every one of our lives. So I think we'd best be informed about what the true nature of it actually is.